you very much. Just as an introductory part, unfortunately my level of French doesn't allow me to do my presentation in French, that's why I will speak English and hope it's fine with everyone being present here. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me for this discussion, and I can say that unfortunately the issues are the one which have been discussed today are too much ignored today. They are taken to the political area too much and forget about the reality of the impact in any area, in interstate relations, in the relations of international organizations, in functioning of the United Nations as such, and naturally on the life of people. As concerned and that's why I'm so happy and so grateful that we have the possibility of this discussion today. I have been asked to talk about the social, political, and humanitarian impacts of unilateral sanctions, but I will speak a little bit broader. The main problem, I'm afraid, is the time limit, which exists, but I will try to do my best not to be too long. As it was correctly noted, 3 months ago, I came back from the country visit to Iran. It was my 4th country visit to the UN Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights, and the previous visits were visits to Qatar, to Venezuela, to Zimbabwe, and the last one to Iran, and I plan to go to Syria in November. Therefore, basically, I have an experience and to be able to compare the situation of the impact of unilateral sanctions to Iran and the impact of unilateral sanctions to Venezuela. As all country visits, I meet both during the country visits. I meet both the governmental part and non-governmental stakeholders in order to be able to compare information and to verify all the facts. Our report is already prepared. It can be found on the web page of the current 51st session of the Human Rights Council, and it will be presented together with the country visit report to Zimbabwe at the Human Rights Council session on September 14th. So it's very close already. As concerns the findings and impact, before I start, I need to mention that a number of issues have been very correctly noted today. The issue of the use of unilateral sanctions is enormously politically perceived. We are speaking in black and white terms only, as about are we imposing sanctions on the bad guys on behalf of some common values, or are they not allowed? I won't go in depth into some elements of international law which have been mentioned today, like retortions, the issue of countermeasures, although that the issue which I can try to bring at the table of states to discuss the legality. I would like to mention the issue that this politicization unfortunately takes the attention away from humanitarian impact and take the attention away from real individuals and lives real individuals. For example, the issue of reprisals have been mentioned today, and the issue of black and white approach. Unfortunately, when we have announced that I plan to go for a country visit to Iran, there was a terrible campaign saying, no, she shouldn't go. We should blame and shame Iran for all its policy, but we shouldn't analyze the impact of sanctions. When I have already been in Iran, there was a campaign, oh, she's not talking to the non-governmental institutions, although we did. We welcomed everyone, all calls for contributions were awful. That's why do not talk to her. And NGOs, not in Iran so much, but for example in Zimbabwe, 95% of them rejected to meet me because of the fear to lose donations and because of the fear to lose the possibility to do their humanitarian job. It wasn't so much in Iran, but NGOs and associations in Iran said that they have already lost any possibility of external donations to be able to continue the humanitarian job they used to do beforehand. And that's why, unfortunately, when we speak about unilateral sanctions, the term reprisals gets a new understanding. And before the end of mission statement and the press conference, I myself, as well as my colleague, appeared to be the victims of blaming and shaming campaigns, saying don't listen to her, don't listen to the findings, because she is Belarusian. And as Belarusian, she is definitely tyrannic. So I sometimes respond to questions like, how can you prove that you are here because you are Belarusian? That's the question what I like the most. And therefore, unfortunately, no, people do not intend to look at the real consequences. That's why the priority of my mandate is to analyze the legality and to analyze the facts. And my mission to Iran was aimed to collect the facts. I've listened as much as I could understand very carefully today to the issues which we discussed. And I have heard about two issues mostly. I have heard about the impact on sectors of industry in Iran, and that's what we have observed. Take into account that when we speak about sectors of industry, we usually discuss as concerns Iran oil industry and banking sector mostly. But in reality, when we speak about Iran, we speak about any area of industry being affected by unilateral sanctions, including handicrafts, people who are doing at home some sort of handicrafts which used to be sold all around the world. Carpets, Persian dolls, any silver stuff, any ceramic, whatever. Yes. We have been reported, for example, that due to the impact over industry, including handicrafts, all those sorts of Iranian handicrafts which have been included into the register of UNESCO as a cultural handicraft heritage, they disappeared. Only 1 of 10 individuals, mostly being aged above 65, are still in business. They use 6 for something else to earn their living. Same comes to health sector. One of the areas, for example, the Iranian radioactive medicine, which used to be exported and which in several areas is pretty unique. It can't be exported any longer because of the impact of sanctions over the insurance companies, transportation companies, and plus the institutions which provide for the certificate of origin for goods produced in Iran to be exported. And as a result, people outside of Iran who used to rely on getting this medicine available, especially, I speak especially about cancer patients, they are not Iranians. They can't benefit of that. When we speak about sanctions imposed over Iran, naturally we usually speak about banking sector. It's quite often forgotten, unfortunately, that we are not speaking about sanctions imposed over certain governmental activity. We are speaking about the total embargo, being cut off SWIFT, and no Iranian, be in Iran or outside of Iran, can do any bank transfer. I had a chance to talk to the diplomatic corps in Iran from countries which impose sanctions. They complain they can't get the salaries. The UN staff in Iran can't get the salaries. So we speak about this level. Formally, there is a very, very narrow path which can be used. But even the UN agencies are complaining that they can use it once and can't use it 10 other times. And maybe can use it once again afterwards. That basically means that every single individual in Iran who used to be engaged in any industry or any service dependent on export or cooperation with abroad, including interpreters, including drivers, including sailmen, including those working in the airplane industry, they are affected. They are losing jobs, they have no income, they have to look for some source for their salaries. But that's not it. The very important issue of the targeted sanctions have been mentioned. And usually when we speak about targeted sanctions, it's presented in this style that, yes, we have targeted sanctions which are seeking to punish bad guys and not to affect the population as a whole. But from my country visits, even in the country visit to Zimbabwe, when sectoral sanctions do not exist, it's only targeted sanctions. Every single individual in Zimbabwe can't do bank transaction and is requested to have their bank accounts closed. So at the very end, when we speak about any third party, business, individual, university, or country, they will decide not to risk. Because maybe tomorrow, the individual which is not targeted today will be targeted tomorrow. Or maybe if they do that, the bank won't like it within the internal domestic policy. Or maybe if a payment comes in the US dollars, they will be controlled and punished by OFAC. And there was a few experience of banks, like for example Paribas Bank, which has been fined up to $9 billion, or the main bank in Zimbabwe, which has been fined to $3.8 billion. That's why everyone chooses de-risking policy. And this de-risking policy, resulting in over-compliance, affects every single individual in the country, as concerns the impact, as concerns the possibility to exercise economic and social rights, and as concerns the possibility to exercise all other rights. So when we speak about the targets and the impact of sanctions, we need to understand that in Iran we're speaking about everyone on the territory and many people outside of Iran. As concerns the economic impact, naturally, from the moment when sanctions have been, we are focusing on the changes which happened in 2010 to 2015. Then what was the development when JCPOA has been concluded, and what has happened starting from 2018 when sanctions have been reinforced and strengthened. And the picture is very clear. Inflation is enormous as soon as sanctions are imposed, first of all. People are losing their jobs, and unfortunately when you do not have any job, you need to feed your family and to find food for yourself. And unfortunately, it pushes people not only to live in poverty, but it pushes people to engage to some sort of illegal activity or in the grey economy. Take into account that Iran has a border with Afghanistan, there were multiple reports about people moving and slandering, for example, medicine or something else. So therefore, I'm not speaking about Iran only, but what has been shown in many of in my country visits report, there are clear evidences that this economic breakdown as a result of sanctions ends up in the growing levels of criminality. Moreover, when we speak about the bank transactions or trade, if we do it directly, we want to buy something, we pay money, it goes directly via banks, we can control what's happening with this money. But if you can't pay, what are you doing? Usually everyone speaks about so-called alternative ways. And then the question is, what is alternative ways? And when we come to the issue of alternative ways, and again, I'm not speaking about Iran only, that's a general situation, alternative ways may include nearly everything. Going via 10 banks instead of 2. Going via third persons who will help you to transfer money, bringing money in cash from neighboring countries, getting goods in unclear and non-transparent ways. And that basically means that what I can observe in my work as a special rapporteur, that as soon as a country falls under sanctions, unilateral sanctions, the country drops in FATF index. Iran is blacklisted now in FATF. Zimbabwe used to be grey-listed for a long period. That's the general tendency. So, when we speak about, I did several touches about social economic situation, but it's much broader and the impact is much broader in reality. As soon as the country stops to be able to get revenue from abroad, it means that the government has less money to be used for social projects. In every country we have areas which need assistance from the side of the government. We speak about disabled individuals, we speak about people who are already retired, we speak about pregnant women and women which have just delivered babies, we speak about children which do not earn money yet. We need money to provide for education, we need money to provide food, we need money to provide subsidies to the poorest categories of population. And in Iran, there is one more category. There are more than 5 million of Afghan refugees being currently hosted by Iran with nearly no assistance from abroad because Office of the High Commissioner of Refugees face terrible problems to get donations to assist people, Afghan refugees in Iran, and faces terrible problems to transfer money, even although in the Office of the High Commissioner on Refugees. And when we speak about 5 million of extra people, with 5 to 10,000 coming in Iran every day, we speak about schools, we speak about medical facilities which shall be provided. And there are numerous reports that the Supreme Leader of Iran has announced that the access to the primary medical care and access to school education is equivalent and open for Afghan refugees. Let's just think, if you get 10,000 people, around half of them are children, how many schools you need to build up every day? If you do not have any revenue, you can't do it. That basically means that classes become bigger and bigger, that every public hospital has to accept more and more patients, both Iranian and Afghanis, every day, and that naturally makes people more vulnerable in that situation. I won't go in details about the subsidies, it's too much what can be said. I will speak about the impact over human rights. Besides the economic and social rights, the right to health, as it has correctly been noted, is affected enormously. Iran was doing a lot trying to mitigate the impact of sanctions, and so far it has been reported that around more than 90% of medicine is produced domestically in Iran. However, there are two problems. What's about those, upon different reports, 5 to 8%, which can't be produced domestically, and which mostly refer to people who suffer from rare and severe diseases, who are probably allergic to the basic medicine. As concerns rare and severe diseases, I speak about sorts of diseases which are so rare that usually there is only one producer around the world. I received, even before the country visit to Iran, I received information from EB patients, so-called butterfly kids, which were not able to get bandages they need. In Iran, I visited EB house and talked to the patients. And statistics is very painful. So there is only one producer, one Swedish producer around the world which is producing these bandages. And the producer is scared to get payment from Iran for the bandages. Producer is scared to trade with Iran or Iranian companies to sell these bandages. And producer refers to the problems of transportation and insurance. For 1 year, there was no access to these bandages, and 15 of 900 only around the whole Iran patients died. There are names, there is information about all of them. Several of them had to face very painful surgeries, like they had legs, feet amputated, hands amputated. And UNICEF has been engaging for 1.5 years to buy 1 year storage for these people. UNICEF, with all UNICEF authority, spent 6 months in getting US license to deliver this good, which is formally considered to be exempted from sanctions. It spent several months in trying to persuade Germany to pay, because the company rejected to get money from UNICEF if it comes from Iran or is destinated to Iran. And at the very end, they get 1 year storage. Afterwards, UNICEF started to get engaged once again to get more. And now, formally, the previous delivery was supposed to be over now. Happily, Swedish government started to be engaged more actively, and they got another 1 year storage. But we're speaking about ad hoc engagement and ad hoc solution. These people have no stability. Thalassemia patients. There are several thousand of these patients, and there is only one medicine produced in Switzerland and one sort of raw materials produced in France. Without that, these people are dying. The statistics is very clear. Mortality rate used to be 25 to 30 before sanctions, and it's 130, 150 now, 5 times. Life expectancy used to be 45, 50 years. It's beyond 20 now. I can go with a number of diseases, but reality is that situation is very similar for many of them. And unfortunately, we are facing a situation when the governments in which the companies are based, they basically say, we explain them that the European Union, you are not obliged to follow US sanctions, but businesses say we are scared. And we come to the whole issue of business and human rights area of work of the Human Rights Council about the due diligence and the obligations of governments to guarantee, obligations of businesses to guarantee, but at the same time it doesn't work. And therefore the issue of humanitarian exceptions. It looks good on paper, but it doesn't function because of bank impediments, financial impediments, fear, transportation, insurance, and many other elements. And the issue of raw materials is one of the most problematic. For some of the medicine which Iran produces itself, it can't produce raw materials. It has to import that, and it comes to the quality of raw materials because, again, it comes through alternative ways, and there were cases reported when the raw materials which came to Iran and from which Iran has produced the medicine were of bad quality, and people started to die or come to the patients because of that. Iran, as different from many other countries, is pretty sustainable as concerns the agricultural production. For example, in Venezuela, the situation is absolutely different, so here Iran is rather sustainable. But we shouldn't forget that besides agricultural production, we speak about the means to produce agriculture. You need to have agricultural machinery. You need to be able to buy spare parts. You need to be able to buy some sort of substances which help you to keep, for example, seeds safe, or something what will help you to observe and predict any natural disasters like fire, earthquakes, because Iran is not stable on that regard. And here we face terrible problems. None of that elements is not even falling into humanitarian exception sector. Therefore, delivery of these goods is enormously problematic, and even the UN institutions are referring to the fact that they can't bring into the country anything which could be qualified as not directly life-saving, but so-called development or sustainable products. And naturally, it affects lives of people a lot. It affects life of those who are engaged in agriculture and who used to do the agricultural things by hand, rather than with the use of machinery they used to do beforehand. Unfortunately, when we speak about the impact on human rights, we are speaking about the effect in other areas as well. For example, in the area of scholarship and education. Unfortunately, today, Iranians are not able to participate in many conferences because there are numerous reports that as soon as you register, there is no line identifying that I'm Iranian. So you're either lying that you're someone else or you can't participate. Same for using Zoom. If you open Zoom service agreement, it clearly says that by saying yes, I agree, I identify that I'm neither the citizen nor resident in North Korea, Iran, Crimea, as well as other countries being under sanctions of the United States. So if you are Iranian, you are only using Zoom illegally or via VPN, just because of nationality. You are also not able to register to many open databases. There was a huge problem in the COVID time, because even at that time it was not possible for Iranians to subscribe for some sort of medical databases to be used. I will present a report to the General Assembly this year in October, referring to the impact of sanctions in cyber area. And there is a huge list of programs which can't be used by Iranians because they are Iranians. Naturally, Iranians are excluded from research grants. Naturally, they face problems in traveling in order to participate in the conferences, because if you can't pay, your card is not functioning to book your flight, or your card is not functioning in order to book your hotel. And naturally, in that situation, those who have used to participate in the programs abroad, they can't get their salary, although they already did their job. You can't transfer money in the country. Unfortunately, I have also been reported that they can't subscribe to the collection of articles. That's why, for example, what I'm doing now in order to raise interest to the issue of sanctions, we are launching sanctions research platform, which will be a part of the UN Human Rights Library, and we are inviting everyone, because I believe that the scholars shouldn't exist in isolation. Only together they can find a solution. Another issue which has been reported is that since several months, the publishing policy of a number of academic journals in various spheres has changed. And if you check the ethics of publishing policy, it's started to contain so-called sanctions clause, which said that the publisher is called to pay extra attention to the authors coming from countries under sanctions. And I have seen many responses from the academic journals saying that we won't start editorial process as concerns your article because you're Iranian or Russian or Venezuelan. And by doing that, we isolate people. By doing that, we can't find any solution. That's why, for example, I'm welcoming all the time, and as a special rapporteur, I'm establishing expert consultations, bringing together scholars from various parts of the world, bringing together NGOs from various parts of the world. There are a number of other issues which are impacting human rights. Scholars can't participate in academic associations because they can't pay. NGOs can't continue participation because they can't pay membership fees. Many issues. And I understand that I'm already abusing the time, but I wanted to list a number of issues of law which come at the table. Traditionally, when it comes to the issue of sanctions, we are talking about maximum the issue of retortions, issue of countermeasures, and very rarely about the principles of international law, like the principle of non-intervention or the principle of sovereign equality. But there are some academic works which are talking about the violation of bilateral trade agreements, or in this case, Iran was pioneering bringing a case to International Court of Justice about the violation of the Treaty of Amity. But in reality, the scope is much broader. When people are not able to participate in academic cooperation, we are speaking about violation of the right of everyone to benefit from the results of academic research, recognized by UNESCO, recognized by the Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, and many others. When we are speaking about impossibility of states like Iran to pay their membership and to continue participation in international institutions, there were already cases when Iran was losing voting rights because of not being able to pay the membership fee. We're speaking about the violation of the sovereign equality of states and the principle of cooperation. When we're speaking about the impossibility of the diplomatic staff of Iran to get their salaries, we're speaking about the abroad, including in France, including in Geneva. We're speaking about the violation of principles of diplomatic immunities. When we are speaking about freezing assets of central banks, we're speaking about violation of norms on the judicial immunities of states and their property, and the customary norms of international law refer clearly and expressly that the assets of central bank are immune because they belong to the state, and having it, the state will be responsible to protect human rights on its territory. There are a number of other issues. For example, when we speak about targeted sanctions, we are speaking about impossibility to get fair trial guarantees. We are speaking about impossibility to protect its right because the access to justice is very limited. Companies, for example, Iranian companies face problems in getting to international commercial arbitrations because they are not, because of the being cut off SWIFT, they can't pay the arbitration fee, or they can't pay to lawyers. Or lawyers are scared to take a case. So that's why, being an international law professor, I believe that in order to settle the issue, we need to speak less about the policy, and we need to speak much more about the law. If everyone behaves in accordance with international law, many problems will go away, and the level of fear will be much less. There are other problems. There is no mechanism for humanitarian impact assessment. There was one established by the UN Security Council to assess the impact over Iraq, but today there is no one to assess the impact of unilateral sanctions. Right now, I'm launching the process, and basically everyone is welcome to assist us in doing that. We try to do the uniform system to be used, not only by me, I'm just one human being, by different UN institutions and NGOs to be able to assess the impact and talk about that. And the second issue, which is important, we need to speak about human rights non-discriminatively. Everyone around the world deserves to be able to enjoy fundamental human rights. And it's naturally shouldn't be forgotten on behalf of some common values. As I repeatedly copy in any of my reports, no references to the situation in the country, no references to anything else justify situation when fundamental human rights are violated by the use of unilateral sanctions and that people are dying. So I apologize for abusing the time limits, and I will be open for any questions if you have them.